Hey guys, Chris here and welcome to a detailed comparison. The Realme 7 up against the Redmi Note 9. So both of these, they are similarly spec'd phones. When you look at them, they both got MediaTek chipsets. They both have 5,000 mAh batteries. Both have 6.5-inch IPS screens, but there's a difference in the refresh rate. Now the key difference between both of these is the chipset. So we have the Helio G95 in the Realme 7. It's a newer chip, it's more potent. And we have in the Note 9, the G85. Is there a big difference between the two? So they do sell for a very similar price here in Europe. And in this in-depth comparison, I'm going to compare the displays in detail, side-by-side comparisons of the camera's performance as well, stills, video, low light, loudspeaker test, battery test, charge time, you name it. It's all going to be compared in this in-depth, detailed comparison review. So the Realme 7, this one, Full HD Plus display versus another Full HD Plus display, both IPS panels, and they're very, very similar in terms of size. So 6.5 inches on the Realme 7 versus 6.53 on the Note 9. So that's a difference that you can't even make out. Now, they both have about the same in terms of bezel left and right, and down the bottom, the chin is tiny little bit smaller, I think, on the Note 9, but it's barely noticeable. Now, there's Gorilla Glass 3 on this one versus Gorilla Glass 5 on the front there. So the Xiaomi does have the slightly better tempered glass protection there on that one, which is good to see. Cutouts here at the top left-hand corner too, as well for both of them. And we've got 13 megapixel sensor in the Note 9 versus 16 megapixels in the Realme 7. So a bit of a difference there, and I'll show you side-by-side camera comparisons later on in the video. Now, material-wise, the build of them, both of them is plastic, okay? A plastic frame around the outside, and we've got a matte finish to the Realme 7 here, which I actually prefer because it picks up a little bit less in terms of fingerprints, although the frame around the outside on the Xiaomi, to me, just feels actually a little bit better the way they have finished the edges on this particular model here. So the cameras, very, very similar here. So both have 48 megapixel main cameras, both have 8 megapixel ultra wides, and both have a, well, kind of useless 2 megapixel cameras. Two of them, one for macro, one for depth information. Now, honestly, we could have done without them because the main cameras can normally do stitching just by themselves just fine. And who's going to be really taking photos with a 2 megapixel camera? So that's a bit of a downside to both of these models. It's not really necessary to have those cameras. Dual LED flashes on both. Now, the fingerprint reader is on the back here on the Note 9, so a different location there. And just personal preference, of course, I actually prefer it on the side where we have it with the Realme 7. So both of the phones too, I'll take a look at the weights of them and we'll see if there's a bit of a difference there because they both have the same battery capacity, which is 5,000 milliamp hours, more or less on both of them. So here's the Realme 7. So the Realme 7, 200 grams versus the Note 9, 200. So there's a 1 gram difference in them. So they both weigh and feel about the same in hand. So overall, in terms of the build quality, I'd have to rate them as about equal. I prefer the material on the back here, both plastic, of course, of the Realme 7, but I think the frame just feels in hand a little bit better on the Note 9. And again, you'll see why these phones are so similar because they both take nano SIMs, 2 of them, and a micro SD card. Now, when you take a look at both the SIM trays on these, they are metal reinforced, and both of them are lacking a gasket there, which would help keep out a little bit of dust. So face unlocking on both of these models does work well. It is very quick. It's maybe as fast as the fingerprint reader, almost. But what I have noticed is sometimes that the Note here, that when I touch the fingerprint reader, like now, it unlocks quite quick. I'll do that again. And it just seems to be animation looks a little bit slower, making it seem a little bit slower than the Realme 7. Now this one, both of them always on fingerprint readers, but I prefer the location of this one on this side. So just tapping it, you can see that that is very, very quick there. And I have noticed it's just got a slight advantage because it doesn't have that animation. It just goes straight into the UI. So that's why I have to give the fingerprint unlocking speed, at least, the win here to the Realme 7, which is marginally faster. Now, when you take a look at the top of these devices here, there is quite a difference here with the microphones. So we have a secondary mic on the top of the Note 9, and I feel that in voice calls, it actually has the superior quality. So if you place a lot of voice calls, the difference isn't much, but it's marginally better actually on the Note 9 to my ears. And here we do have an IR transmitter as well. So if that's something you need, then this is obviously the model to go for between these two. Now, the layout on the bottom is almost identical here. You can see we've got the Type-C ports. Now, charge time, I will show you that shortly between both of them, but wanted to point out we've got 3.5mm headphone jacks, downward firing speakers. There will be a sample later on, but the output from both of these 3.5mm headphone jacks is good, but I have to rate the Note 9, the Redmi Note 9, I think the audio quality, 3.5mm out analog here, does actually sound a little bit better, and it doesn't have the two mics down the bottom here, or just the single mic that the Realme 7 has. It's just the single mic there, but overall, that's why I think the voice quality on this one sounds better. But later on in this detailed, in-depth comparison, I'll give you a sample too of both of the single downwards firing loudspeakers on these phones. So there is a big difference here between the charge times of both of these phones. So on the left here, this is the Realme 7 with its 30-watt charging. Took just 52 minutes to go from 10 to 100%, and going from 9% to 100% with just 18-watt charging, which is of course much slower, took 135 minutes on the Redmi Note 9. So if you needed the phone that charges that 5,000 milliamp hour battery the fastest, then clearly the 30-watt charging, of course, is going to always win here. So I've measured both of these panels here, and there is a big difference in terms of maximum brightness that I didn't expect. So down the bottom here, this is the Note 9, this is the Realme 7. Now the Realme 7's maximum output with a white image is 471 nits, and we get 403 nits with the Note 9, so it's definitely a duller panel. And when you look at them closely, you will see that both of them do exhibit those typical IPS traits of having, especially with the cutouts, that you get this, that you get a tiny bit of a darker patch, darker area, darker pixels, dimmer pixels around the cutout, and it's noticeably worse to my eyes on the Note 9 here. So it has a slightly lower quality panel. Not that both of these are high quality panels. I wouldn't rate them as high quality panels. So you can see this is the Realme 7 here. It doesn't look quite as bad. And if I do put them both side by side here, at the same angle more or less, you can probably see that the Note 9 panel, just to my eyes, and even here on camera, I'm sure you can see that, seems to be a little bit worse off in terms of the dimness around that cutout and even the edges as well on the display. Okay, so a little bit now on to our just general performance of this phone in the UI. So a big difference with the refresh rate, of course. So we're looking at 90 Hertz, which is much faster than 60 with these IPS panels here. And the RAM difference, I know it's not fair, and the chipset too, but you got to remember why I'm comparing these isn't because of the differences here, it's because of the price is the main thing. The price of these in Europe is the same, offering similar battery capacity, similar rear camera setup, in fact almost identical, and that's why I'm comparing both of them here. So you look at the UI here and you can probably make out here that it just feels so much smoother on the Realme 7, which of course is on the right of the screen here. And it's, I think, not down to because it's 90 Hertz. Even if I put this phone onto 60 Hertz, it still feels smoother. That's probably because of the better chipset, probably because of the double the RAM there is the reason why, and behind that, of course. Now, as I mentioned before, that both of these phones, these configurations here in Europe, they do have NFC, okay, which is handy to have there. And they both do pass the safety net check too as well, which is good. Let's get on to some other performance metrics here as well. So when you first get these phones and you boot them up, you are going to see a bit of bloatware on both of them, but the Xiaomi Redmi Note 9, it definitely takes the cake here. It is a lot of bloatware. Now, I uninstalled approximately 2 gigabytes of bloat with this particular model here. That's quite a bit. Now, you both get over about 110 gigabytes of free storage on these models when you first get them. And this is the battery life, which really did surprise me. So what I did is I ran both of these with battery set, the screen set to 200 nits of brightness. And I didn't expect the 90 Hertz refresh rate, I kept it stock, to actually better the 60 Hertz. Normally 60 Hertz would be a lot more efficient, but it's down to the chipsets here, and that's why there's a bit of a difference of almost, well, 3.5 hours, 2.5 hours or so. And that's quite a bit. I didn't really expect this. Now, and 2.2 scores here. Huge difference. We're talking about the G95 versus the G85, and look at the GPU scores as well. And you do notice this in gaming, which I will show you later on. So again, yes, not really that fair because of this big difference in the chipset's performance. But as I'll say and said before many times, they are selling for a super similar price here in Europe, and that's my reason for comparing both of them. Later on, I'll probably compare the Poco X3 versus the Realme 7 Pro as well. GPS performance is identical, really no real difference there. Now, wireless is something that is restricted by both of these chipsets. Now, I expected a bit of a better result here because the Snapdragon, for example, 720, would allow much better wireless speeds, but this particular set here, the Helio G95 and 85, tops out for some reason at about 200 megabits per second. You're not going to get any better than that. So that is a little disappointing there with that one. And here we do have on both of them a Widevine Level 1 cert, so that means Netflix in full HD, and the Camera 2 API support. We've got Level 3 support, which is what we want on the Realme 7, so that's going to be great for, hopefully, maybe. There might be some Gcam ports, but with MediaTek, it's a little difficult. And only full here support with the Redmi Note 9. And internal storage, big difference in speeds here as well. So we've got UFS 2.1 spec, and just UFS, I think it's just 2 or not running in dual channel. There's a big difference there, or even eMMC 5 spec on the Xiaomi. So even though they're both 128 gigabytes of storage, there is that big difference there, which is also going to lead to a bit of a difference in performance when you're installing and then loading applications as well. And the big difference with the chipset, of course, that the Realme 7 definitely pulls ahead, and you see it when you use the phones. So I'm going to give you a sample of the loudspeakers now, and I've got to give the win here to the Redmi Note 9 in terms of audio quality, both for 3.5mm output. Voice calls as well sound slightly better on the Note 9, and the loudspeaker has a little bit more bass to it, a little bit more punch to it. So they're both downward firing loudspeakers at the bottom here. Here's a sample of both of them at 100% volume. And now onto our gaming performance. So as expected, the more potent chipset here does have the better performance in-game. This is Shadowgun Legends, and it just feels a little bit smoother here on the Realme 7. The Realme 7 also has that 90 Hz, which some games can take advantage of, that can run at higher FPS or don't have a frame limit cap. So let's take a look at our cameras now, side by side, a little bit of a comparison here with these cameras. So this is video quality, 1080p maximum on both of them with the front-facing cameras. And right now, taking a look at the quality, I've looked at it on my PC. Something's going on with the Xiaomi quality, seems to be quite washed out. It's almost like got some skin smoothing going on or something. And I have none of that on. There's actually no beauty option with the video, but I don't know why it's happening. So for the video quality here, both of them aren't exactly that great because there's no electronic image stabilization. But I have to give the win here to the Realme 7. Now looking at the maximum video quality we can shoot on both of these. So we get 4K 30 frames per second without any electronic image stabilization on the Realme 7. It's sharper looking video, but it shakes all over the place. And now with the Redmi Note 9, it's 1080p 30 maximum, but it does have electronic image stabilization. As you can see, it's much smoother, but it doesn't look as sharp. And color-wise, the colors are more natural throughout on the Redmi Note 9, I feel. You can also shoot ultra-wide video on both of them, but it's 1080p maximum, and they do have electronic image stabilization here. For ultra-wide video quality, both of them are quite average. You get a lot more exposure shift, I find, on the Realme 7. It seems to jump around a little bit, and it tends to be a tad over-sharpened, I feel. And with the main cameras, the trend seems to continue. A little bit over-sharpening, but the Realme 7, I noticed, does seem to do much better with HDR, capturing just a little more detail in the shadows. And the colors do look more natural, however, on the Redmi Note 9. So they're both kind of trading blows. It's down to personal preference. However, I feel the portrait photos definitely come out better on the Realme 7. They don't tend to blow up the background like we do have here, as you can see, with the Redmi Note 9. Selfie shots, I did notice that often the Redmi Note 9 would be a little bit better in daylight, but then sometimes they would be very similar. So I rate them with selfies as almost the same, maybe a slight edge to the Note 9. And as for ultra wides, well, they're a little bit more punchier, perhaps sharpened a little bit more on the Realme 7 versus the Note 9. But I think the Note 9 shots are a little bit more natural. It's down to personal preference with the ultra wide shots. They're both not too bad for 8 megapixel sensors. And the low light performance, very similar. So the trading blows at times. Sometimes one is slightly sharper, slightly more noise as well to it, a little bit clearer than the other. And it really depends on the shot here, as you can see with examples I'm showing you. So if you look closer, you may see here that the Note 9 has a little bit more noise. It could look a little bit clearer also on the Realme 7. So it's again down to really personal preference. It's subjective with the low light photography here. It is the same sensor as well we're looking at. Okay guys, so that's a wrap there of the comparison. Now if I was to pick one of these myself, and if they're priced very similarly, which they are as I've mentioned a few times here in Europe, then I would go for the Realme 7 unless audio is your preference and priority there. If you really must have the absolute best audio quality, loudspeaker definitely has a bit more bass to it and sounds just richer and fuller on the Redmi Note 9. It also has better 3.5mm output. And when it comes to selfies, it can sometimes take a slightly better selfie shot there as well. But that is really it when it comes down to what is better on the Redmi Note 9. The Realme 7, because of the more potent, newer chipset, the 90Hz screen, slightly brighter display, slightly better battery life as well, would be my choice there. So now you know the difference between these two. Hopefully I answered any doubts you had or questions between these two models. And if you did like this video, please do give a thumbs up and do subscribe for more up and coming detailed in-depth comparisons just like this one.